So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and we return to Khan Doom, which is another one of those maps which is more or less in the regular rotation at this point. But it's one of those maps that I also rather like because it's pretty much the quintessential wedding cake style settlement where you have these layers very clearly defined in the defensive positions with walls and gates, not just on the outer walls but also within the inner walls that the defenders can potentially use. It's a decent settlement, and it's also one that the attackers can also make work for them as well, because it's not so constrained that the defenders can just blob up in several choke points and stop them indefinitely, because there are wider spaces which potentially, especially when the attackers break through a primary defensive point like the outer walls, can really take advantage of attacking the defenders as they retreat and really starting to make up that percentage difference. So it's a nice one. It's also got a theme to this battle, but not quite as we know it, because it is going to be 3 Angmar armies on the defence, as perhaps you would expect given the fact that this is Khan Doom, but it's going to be 5 Mordor armies on the attack, so the Witch King has clearly gotten a bit uppity and has staged a bit of a rebellion against Mordor, and Mordor have marched all the way north to bring him back into the fold by force. So it'll be interesting this, because both Angmar and Mordor do share quite a lot of strengths. The primary difference between the two is, I would say, Angmar's mid-tier, sort of mid to upper tier, is more solid, whereas Mordor's high tier, up to their sort of uber tier, is more varied. I think that's the best way I could put the differences between the two of them. So we shall see which comes out on top here. Of course, Angmar do have something of an ace up their sleeve with the witches in a situation like this, especially when they're on the defence. Mordor don't really have an equivalent to that, but they do have a few other things which we will probably be seeing as we go through their armies, starting off with MP Beckamy. It's been a little while since we've seen him. He's going to be playing as the first Mordor army, and he's got some Moran Halberdiers. A good choice. They are better than the Angmar Halberdiers, I would certainly say. That's where Mordor can lay down a bit of an advantage. Their rank and file is better than Angmar's entry-level units, albeit they do lag behind Angmar's mid-tier units a little bit more so. So it's going to be quite interesting, but the Moran Halberds will be very good for dealing with stuff like those Guardians of Khan Doom, or at least equalising the fight against them. The problem they will have, of course, is the stuff like the Witcher-Armed Pikemen can outrange them, but they don't have to worry about archers quite so much. Angmar's range damage is going to be very much centred around their witches and support units like the Scourge Raiders. Orc fodder, very, very cheap for the first one, quite cheap as well for the second one, to be fair. So if you want to pad out your army with some numbers, Mordor are of course a faction which can do that very, very easily, and the Orc fodder you can send into a situation without worrying too much about whether you're getting value for money out of them or not, because chances are you are. You don't really want to be sending them in all alone though to a melee fight where they're just going to lose instantaneously, because while you're not losing a great deal, you're not really gaining anything either, and you can gain something with the Orc fodder, especially if you use them as a bit of a meat shield as part of a general advance. The Orc Maulers, pretty much the opposite. You do want to be much more careful about where you send them, because while they are a very cheap unit, and you're not going to be losing out on much if you lose them too cheaply either, they can be very, very useful, because entry-level shock infantry unit for the Orcs like this, especially the armour-piercing stuff, the Orc Maulers, Angmar have an equivalent to this, which we may very well be seeing in their army compositions as well. Very, very cheap, very easy to get your money's worth out of them, but also the armour-piercing is so useful. They can really punch above their weight, especially, again, if you order them as part of a general advance to be in and amongst things, because that armour-piercing going to be very, very useful again, dealing with those Angmar mid to upper tier units. They won't be able to win 1-to-1 necessarily, but they can really help as part of a mixed advance. Troll drummers of course are still bugged, so they don't actually offer all that much in terms of utility, but they can still be, they look cool at the very least, and they can still be used in combat. Like, they won't die instantaneously at least, which is nice, but they're just really going to be here for the looks more than anything else. Temple Guard, this is something Angmar really don't have. Mordor certainly have an archer force, which is something good, and the Temple Guard are pretty much the pinnacle of this, depending upon what you're looking for. Armour-piercing archers, combined with the fact that they can hold their own very well in melee. I think among the armour-piercing archers, actually, they're the best in melee, which is nice. Very, very useful unit. They do need to get into a good position to use their arrows, of course, and that is easier said than done in a siege like this, but we shall see. Moran Halberdiers are here as well. We've got some Olakai. Among the trolls, I think the Olakai are the single strongest troll that both factions can deploy, but of course Angmar have got 2 similar level trolls, whereas Mordor have to only make do with the one, but still this kind of unit really does make a big difference when you decide to commit them to the front line and when you don't. Orc Javelins, again, good supporting tool, will be useful for breaking down those Angmar front lines when they really dig in, because of course Angmar have got that heft to them in terms of their heavy units, as I've said. Orc Javelins can be a good tool for dealing with them, and of course if worse comes to worse, the Orc Javelins will be a lightning rod for any sort of range support that Angmar have deigned to bring. We shall see what happens there. Yeah, the Sauron's Will, definitely a good choice as well with their big serrated axes. They're effectively just an Orc Mauler unit that is much more well-rounded and much better overall. You do pay a lot more for them though, so the jeopardy is there that you do need to be a lot more careful with them because you need to get your money's worth out of them. That's not too much of an issue against Angmar though, because most of their units outside of their entry-level units are going to be vulnerable to the Sauron's Will, and even if they do find themselves in combat with an entry-level unit from Angmar, the Sauron's Will still be very good against them. They just won't be as efficient as they otherwise would have been. Uruk Captains I think are a good choice as well because they're a relatively cheap bodyguard unit actually, but the main difference they have in comparison to a lot of these other orcish units like the Goblin Captains for example, or the Goblin King's Bodyguard I should say, is the fact that they have armor piercing, which like I said against Angmar, very useful. The Blackguard of Barad-dûr, both of the factions on the field today are the only ones that have access to these Great Shield Infantry units. Angmar have access to individually the better one, but the Blackguard of Barad-dûr can be massed up more readily, and of course when you're on the attack, that's when this kind of unit can really shine. We shall see if the Blackguard of Barad-dûr can push their way through those solid Angmarim front lines. And finally, some Sauron's Will over here as well, so a decent mixed army that from MP Beckamy. I'm sure we'll be seeing much more from the other factions. We have Big Les, who has got some Orc fodder as well. We'll be going through these armies a little bit more quickly unless we run across a unit that the others don't have. Moran on Guard, for example, are effectively just a bulkier unit of Orc fodder, to be honest. They are more mid-tier, they have more in common with the standard Moran on lineup in the sense that their armour is a little bit better. They're just a better unit all around, but you do actually pay a real amount of money for them in comparison to the Orc fodder, because they are actually a unit which can genuinely hold their own against other lower end units, albeit as soon as the going gets tough, the Moran on Guard are not really a fantastic unit in of themselves. More Troll Drummers, more Orc fodder. Back over here we also have Moran on Infantry, which is something which was largely omitted from MP Beckamy's army. This is really the rank and file unit that Mordor use. As a line infantry unit, they really get their strength from being fairly numerous and fairly solid. Individually they're not going to be winning any quality battles, of course, but they're decent. It's much the same sort of situation here as it is with the Rudauer Swordsman, in the sense that they're just okay, and there are so many of them, and you can use them in a variety of situations. Just a really versatile unit that you can use combined with other units, which is a real theme, of course, among Mordor's lower tier units especially. More Blackguard of Barad-dûr for pushing through those lines, more Orc Maulers for offering a bit of cheap AP bite along with the Moran on Halberdiers, which combine that with the Phalanx. More Olag High. Big Les has also decided to punt for some Nazgul. Again, the Nazgul, you really get the most out of them when you combine them with other units. If you send them forward on their own, they're going to get focused down, especially by other elite units, but if you send them forward with other units, they can be really difficult to single out, and that's where they can slowly but surely go about their business. More Sauron's Will, some Temple Executioners, so he's gone for this unit as well without the armour upgrade, but this again is something that Angmar don't really have, a really high-end heavy swordsman. They do have something else, of course, which I'm sure we'll see on the defence, but still a very fine unit indeed. And Temple Guard as well, so some armour-piercing archers. Moving on to the middle army, we have Farkin, who has got, again, some Orc Maulers, plenty of Orc Maulers in fact, with some more Troll Drummers, some Orc Javelins, and some Moran on Infantry over there. The rest of his army is a little further back, including some Blackguard of Barad-dûr, some Moran on Halberdiers, plenty of Moran on Halberdiers. In fact, he has got the upgrade on his Temple Executioner, so they look much bulkier, as you can see, with that grey plate armour. Nazgul, Olag High, and he has also got some armour-piercing Uruk Captains. Interesting to note is that any one of these Mordor armies could have the Shadow Bows, the Ardenaim Shadow Bows in them, which are of course a ranger unit, a bulky ranger unit as well, but of course they will be lurking around somewhere if they have them. Bloodbath McGrath has got some Orc Javelins. He's got a Troll Catapult, which is pretty interesting. So he's going to be able to do some damage to the walls potentially. and the Troll Catapult is much less fiddly to use than most other Medieval 2 inspired artillery pieces because they can actually move very, very quickly, which, to be honest with you, is the best feature of the Troll Catapult. Yes, the trolls themselves are much more useful than the other artillery crew because once all is said and done they are trolls and can do a bit of damage, but the speed that they can use their artillery at is a really underrated feature, I think, because Medieval 2 artillery can be such a pain in the arse because of how slow they are and because of their pathfinding. The Troll Catapults avoid that most of the time. Random Guard, Olag High, we've got some more Orc Maulers back here, 2 units of Olag High, which is an interesting choice. It's also the first army we've seen that's got these Minas Morgul Chosen, which is a really bulky unit of spears, which wouldn't be out of place in Angmar's mid-tier, to be fair, in terms of focus. Melkor's Chosen, good to see a bit of cavalry on Mordor's side of things, because Angmar could sally out, given their mounted divisions. Their mounted divisions themselves are a little bit more defensive, generally speaking, but we shall see. Orc Fodder, 2 units of them, and some Uruk captains here at the back with some Temple Guardsmen. Finally, all the way over here, we can see a Grizzly Fox playing as the final Mordor army. Temple Guard, I'm pretty sure we won't see anything new in this army because I think we've seen just about everything we can see. Temple Executioners, Morannon Halberds, as well as lots of Morannon infantry, Orc Javelins, some more Blackguard and Barad-dûr, some Minas Morgul Chosen, Troll Drummers, and some Orc Maulers as well, just some more Minas Morgul Chosen in there, and finally some Uruk captains. So, now we shall move on to the defenders, the Angmarim, as they set up ready to try and throw off their master's shackles. Starting off with Steelbow Ranger, who is the one who sent me this battle replay, so we shall be seeing this battle from his perspective. Witchrealm Scourge Raiders are going to be a very important tool in this particular battle, especially with the amount of Morannon Halberdiers that are on the attack, because something like the Scourge Raid is going to be ideal for dealing with them. Armour upgrade as well, so a little bit bulkier, albeit there's not too many archers that we saw on the attack from Mordor actually. It's going to be much more about that upfront strength from Mordor more than anything else. It's really just the Temple Guard that we saw, and they'll be much more choosy about their targets, I would imagine. But the Scourge Raid is still going to be very useful for those throwing axes that they have. Guardians of Khan Dûm with the armour upgrade. This really is the kind of unit where Mordor don't really have an equivalent. This really bulky line infantry unit, which is mid to upper tier Mordor. When it gets into the upper tier stuff, it starts to sort of diverge a little bit from Angmar, whereas their entry level units are relatively similar. But it's going to be a very important unit on the field today, because of course a lot of their holding power comes from this kind of unit. Mordor, of course, have got plenty of AP to try and deal with that. Barrow-wights are another specialty unit that Angmar have, again with more of a focus around survivability. It's going to be difficult for Mordor to actually hack and slash their way through a unit like this outside of some of their higher tier units, so it'll be really interesting to see how Mordor deal with a unit like the Barrow-wights, given that the situation is what it is and Angmar can afford to dig in. Angmar Halberdiers, like I said, probably a little bit worse overall than the Morannon Halberdiers, but having a cheap unit of an AP Phalanx is still a useful thing to have in the Angmar roster, and the Blackwatch Legion can actually act as a bit of a counteracting force to a lot of the Black Legion of Barad-dûr that we saw on the other side of the field. Witchrealm Hammerguard, this is what Angmar have, of course. Instead of a two-handed heavy sword bodyguard, they have an armour-piercing two-hander as a bodyguard. And to be honest with you, I think that the Witchrealm Hammerguard are the better unit for Angmar to have in this situation, because Mordor do have a lot of armoured units as well, or at least a lot of their units. Armour is their main vector for keeping themselves alive, so the Witchrealm Hammerguard should be a pretty good unit to use in this situation. Scourge Raiders, back further up we can see another force with some more Scourge Raiders, some upgraded Witchrealm Pikemen. Like I said, the range on the Witchrealm Pikemen going to be very important because Mordor don't have a pike of their own. Guardians of Khan Dûm, some more Witchrealm Pikemen over here. Gundabad Guard, which they are spearmen, they're a little bit cheaper than the Guardians of Khan Dûm overall, but of course they do have access to the shield wall formation, which the Guardians of Khan Dûm do not. And of course they have an anti-cavalry bonus, which is not going to be terribly relevant other than that one unit of Melkor's Chosen. Trolls of Gundabad, and the General's Bodyguard unit, of course, the Witchrealm Blackguard, which interestingly enough, Mordor don't really have a unit that's on this unit's level. The Uruk Captains are kind of similar because they're a weapon and shield unit, but the armour piercing means, and the cheaper nature of the Uruk Captains also makes them different enough, I would say, that they're not completely comparable. And there's also some Trolls of Angmar. Medexa is another player on the defence, some Angmar Halberds again, Guardians of Khan Dûm, some Trolls of Gundabad, Guardians and Witchrealm Scourge Raiders, got some Barrow-wights, Gundabad Guard, We have got some more Barrow-wights as we head upwards. A defensive catapult, which in this situation on Khan Doom, this is definitely the best gate to patrol because it's such a brutal position to put artillery. Of course, we've got some witches, some witch round pikemen, some witch round blackguard. And as we go down here as well, we can see more Gundabad guard, more scourge raiders and pikemen. So yeah, lots of the mid tiers actually, more so than perhaps leaning in more heavily to the upper tiers like the trolls and the bodyguard infantry, although they are still interspersed throughout. There are the trolls of Angmar, and the final player is MSQ2, some Angmar marauders here, some scourge raiders, some blackguard. We've also got some trolls of Gundabad, some guardians of Khan Doom and Barrow-wights. The first player to actually dip into the orc fodder equivalent for Angmar in the Snaga stalkers. He's actually got a mounted company as well in the Warg skirmishers and the Witch Realm Inquisitor, so he could sally out quite early here. We should have to wait and see. Barrow-wights, guardians of Khan Doom with pikes, Angmar marauders. Angmar marauders is an interesting inclusion as well, of course, the entry-level line infantry unit. Obviously, again, worse than the Morannon infantry, generally speaking. Much more for just bulking out your army, as opposed to the guardians of Khan Doom, which can really hold the line. There are the witches, some hammer guard, and some trolls of Angmar, with some guardians of Khan Doom at the back. So, without further ado, let's begin. It'll be interesting to see how both sides approach the early phases here, whether Mordor will... Well, I guess Mordor don't have much of a choice really, but to be all in. They don't really have the lower end archers that they could use to skirmish over a long period of time with Angmar, and I imagine the battle would be much longer in terms of the frames that it would take if that were indeed the case. And Angmar, of course, can absorb quite a lot of skirmish ammunition, especially from lower quality archers. So Mordor are going to be going all in, and you can see here Farkin may very well be all on his own actually attacking this central gate, so he may very well have to be the fall guy for Mordor. We should have to wait and see. But as long as all Mordor armies are putting a lot of pressure on Khan Doom, the numbers should eventually tell, I think, for Mordor, unless of course stuff like the witches can really get devastating volleys off. But it's one of those matchups where Angmar have got all of the survivability, but too few of their units have got the punch required, I think, to overcome the vast amount that Mordor are going to have on the attack, albeit Farkin's army is maybe a little bit on the smaller side, which may come back to haunt him as he has to attack a gate all on his lonesome, whereas the other two gates may very well be attacked by two whole armies, albeit Grizzly Fox has got quite a long way to march before he gets into an adequate position to support Bloodbath's army. Ran on guard on the way forwards. Bloodbath, of course, as well has the luxury of being the attacking player to have brought some artillery. I believe that was actually a rule in this battle where only one piece of artillery per side, and Bloodbath McGrath has been the lucky recipient of that, so he will also be able to knock some holes in the wall, which I do think will be quite beneficial, because if Angmar do decide to try and dig in on these walls, then the siege towers may not be the best route onto the wall, but some of the attackers won't have much of a choice, of course, as the rain starts to pour. We've only seen Khan Doom covered in snow once, and given its location, you would have imagined that to be the case more of the time in the far north. Meanwhile, Scourge Raiders up on the wall. It is a good point, actually, to be fair. There aren't too many archers on either side, so it's going to be all about, or mostly all about, that strength up close and personal. The Scourge Raiders throwing their axes on the wall, the trolls coming in as well, and they will of course do horrendous damage to these orc fodder. Like, spears in general are not great at dealing with trolls because of that malice, and trolls do technically count as infantry. So yeah, the orc fodder are not going to do too well here. Having said that, oh no, those are Morannon guard as well, so yeah, Morannon guard again. Spears, they'll do a little better, I suppose. And of course, in the battle between the two fodder units, the Snaga Stalkers have got that slight edge because of that spear malice as well. But of course, the main thing here is going to be the fact that they're just here backing up the trolls as they move forward. And they've got that support from the wall, so a nice sally out here from MSQ2, I like it. There are those troll drummers over there as well. You need to get some slightly more damaging units on the front line. This is exactly why I think some orc maulers would have been a good thing, because they would have still taken a lot of losses, of course, especially if they were taking throwing axe fire. But they would be able to leave more of an impact on these trolls, and it's two units of trolls out here as well, so they really are going to be doing some pretty substantial damage here to Mordor. Another unit of fodder is marching forward. Mordor, of course, can engage in this kind of tactic, however, just sending forward a tide of units slowly but surely and wearing Angmar down. It's a dangerous game to play, though, because Angmar are a better faction overall at absorbing that kind of pressure than many in the game, not just among the orcs. Farkin is there, and he is going to start peeling away at some of these outer walls here, is Bloodbath. And of course, he can afford to take his time a little bit more because he will get the best out of this assault when Grizzly arrives. So he can afford to peel away at some of these walls, take down the gate with just a single unit of fodder moving forwards, as we can see. Grizzly actually may very well get the best out of his army if he sends half of it to assist Bloodbath and half of it to assist Farkin here in the middle. I think spreading the pressure all around Angmar is the best way to deal with them. And given the fact that this is going to be all about that strength in melee, Angmar really need to choose their engagements nigh on perfectly. How many of those trolls managed to escape? Not many. So you can see as soon as the Olai Kai arrived on the front line, and as soon as some of the damage really started to bite down on the Angmar and they started to struggle, and now of course it's just Snaga going up against Olai Kai and a sea of opposition orcs. And actually there are witches here who are getting ready to fire, and you can see the Olai Kai saw them, so that's good awareness from those orcish, not Mordor trolls, which MP Bekami was commanding, and in the end they only really managed to kill off some really inconsequential fodder orcs. I mean, they do get a very nice hit there right into the middle. They do rout their own Snaga as a result as well, but it's a hit at the very least. But the Witchers are such an important unit for Angmar on this occasion that I'm not sure. The sheer volume of kills that you're getting, I suppose it is worth it, but Orc fodder and Moran on guard, it's not a huge amount of the money that Mordor have invested into this assault. And it's the kind of units that your infantry is going to be able to deal with relatively easily as well. But again, we'll have to wait and see. You can only judge that kind of decision based on who ultimately goes on to win the battle. Meanwhile, Farkin's still biding his time a little bit. It's also worth mentioning as well that we haven't seen the mounted divisions of MSQ leave the settlements as of yet. I don't know where they've gone even. Are they still over here? No. Did they just leave the settlement? No. Where art thou? They're not in the town centre either, so he's not cowering that far back. Meanwhile, you can see this is a danger. Like, Khan Doom is one of those unique settlements that does actually have functioning arrow towers, and they can set siege towers ablaze, and that's what's happened here. Of course, they're not exactly hurting siege towers. There's tons of them here, but that is a potential hazard when you actually do get your siege towers to the wall and your units are climbing up them. If the tower does start burning down, it could crumble while it has units inside. That's something you often see in the campaigns I've been doing in Divide and Conquer a little bit more so, but it's something people often forget, I think, is something that can happen in these Reforged multiplayer games, because especially on these custom settlements, towers are often not really a factor in proceedings. Where is his... Oh, there is water. There they are. I'm absolutely blind. His mounted units were right there all along. In my defence, the wargs do, when they turn into sprite form, they do turn into brown blobs rather than the sort of grey wolves that they're more easily definable as up close. Orc fodder. More sections of wall crumbling. So really it's been the cause of an infantry sally out that we've seen most of our actions so far. Aside from that, Mordor are just really setting up for the hammer blow, I would assume. They're still not moving in with Farkin just yet, as the arrows continue to do their thing. There, of course, the siege tower crumbles into its standard medieval 2 model, because there isn't a crumbled version of the Mordor siege tower, inspired from the movies, of course. One dreads to think where they get that leather to apply to the front of the front of their siege towers. But Steelbow Ranger going for sort of a wider defence here, which is interesting. I suppose he thinks that it's pointless to sort of set up 3 separate defences along these 3 choke points here because they're so close together. But allowing Mordor in could prove to be a bit of a mistake if Grizzly's entire army elects to follow Bloodbath and Wrath in. So it's certainly a bit of a dangerous game to be playing. But time will tell. Now the Guardians of Khan Doom. And we've seen well, we're seeing the third and final gate fall. And the Snaga do indeed run away now, only 4 of them remain. Now they're also pushing up siege towers to the wall. Be interesting to see what they elect to attack this wall with. After all, it is only a unit of Angmar Marauders that are marshalling this wall. All you need to do is send a unit of reasonable quality and you would start to gain the upper hand. I suppose they're counting on the support of something like these Scourge Raiders to keep everything in check. The Angmar Marauders are merely the anvil. Down on the lower level, 2 units of Barrow Wights are going to be more than enough to keep things in check for a while. Forward come the Olag High, which we've already seen a bit of combat, of course. One of them is already bloodied up. The Barrow Wights have also got very little mass to them, which means the Trolls are going to get right up in there very, very quickly. But the Khan Doom units, the Witch Realm units also coming forwards now. Going to be keeping those, or trying to keep those Trolls under control as well. Well, most units would be able to defeat the Angmar Marauders in melee. Already depleted Orc fodder, however, that is not going to be the case, unfortunately for them. Over here, anything being sent up this siege tower? Yes, and again, I think it's going to be the Witcher-marked Morannon Guard as well, and I think we're starting to see, yeah, it's a general advance at this point all across the field. As we can see, Orc Maulers, I'd actually say the Orc Maulers are a better unit for sending in. I mean, they will take a lot of damage here as they get immediately surrounded by these Guardians of Khandu, but they will clear a spot, and more than that, they're actually capable of dishing out some damage to something like the Guardians of Khandu. And armor piercing going to prove to be very useful. Also the same thing over here as Medexa continues to hold this wall, but it is a more difficult task for Farkin to marshal his strength here, as he is going to be all on his lonesome. Orc Javelins from Grizzly Fox poking in here and going to be trying to wear down the Mordor defenders. Not too many losses there actually, head on. They will take losses over a longer period of time, however, the Angmar Halberdiers. There's really nothing else in range that they could go for. I suppose the Barrow Wights wouldn't be the worst target in a situation like that. You can see now the Orc Javelins getting a little bit too close for comfort, so now the Angmar Halberdiers are going to move forward to engage them, but this of course is just going to light the red touch paper. Some units from Farkin over here as well, which is a little bizarre, I have to say. If the defenders are paying attention, then they may very well notice the fact that the middle is not going to be such a problem to hold on to. The Olag High, they're taking a little while to perish. None of these units that are attacking through the gate initially here are defending the gate here are too high damage, but they'd already taken a bit of damage, and of course they were overwhelmed. That's the thing about the Barrow Wights, the light mass can be a bit of a problem, but if you attack into them you can find yourself getting surrounded by them very, very quickly because they're so easy to push through, but then you're surrounded by them. It's kind of a bizarre situation when you're dealing with the Barrow Wights like that. Morannon Halberds are wavering as well. More Olag High are on the way forward as well. I mean, we'll see. Mordor definitely attacking fairly aggressively over here, but thus far the attacks on the walls haven't really paid dividends because they sent forward depleted and lower end units, so even the Angmar Marauders were able to be victorious in melee, which is perhaps a sign that things aren't necessarily going to code for Mordor over here. Plenty of units are routing as well. A lot of them are very depleted though, a lot of them are already very damaged, so it's not the end of the world. The drummers are here of course, but the drummers, while under normal circumstances the morale boosting effect would be very useful, it's bugged of course, so it's not actually having any kind of impact whatsoever, which is a shame. But MP Beckamy has the right idea, even if he's not getting his money's worth from that. Morannon Halberds up on the walls as well. So all of a sudden these Guardians of Khandu coming under immense pressure, lots of armour piercing, Trolls of Angmar up on the walls, as well as Olag High. It's always interesting to see Trolls grappling for a wall. Khandu units, I mean, they are holding on. Definitely very eager to make sure Farkin can't gain any sort of foothold, considering it's just him, and also considering the fact that he is sending over reinforcements to the other side as well. Morannon Halberdiers, Temple Executioners, so Mordor are serious about this though as well. Temple Executioners, they are a very, very serious unit indeed, albeit we shall see how well they can interact with those Trolls of Gundabad. Meanwhile over here we have also got a large scale and melee engagement as well. Mordor getting a little bit further ahead of themselves. These Orc Maulers actually have got an armour upgrade as well from Grizzly Fox, so a little bit stronger. But of course they're also facing off against an armour-piercing unit. There you can see a shower of throwing axes from the Scourge Raiders being utilised. There are the Ardenheim Shadow Bows. I thought at least one player would have brought some rangers for the attack. They do have a good opportunity here to rip some shots through some exposed Angmar defenders. From the front though, a lot of these Angmar units, I mean, I would have shot into that blob there, even though a lot of them were heavier units, because you're just going to hit so much more. Barrow Wights moving in, Moran on infantry. I am a little bit surprised, I must say, that the attackers are not being much more aggressive over here. More javelins being utilised, Guardians of Kharn pushing forward once again. Grizzly Fox and Bloodbath, however, are being quite savvy about this. They're pulling the Angmar defenders that are in this part of the settlement around a little bit more, perhaps, than the other two attacks are. The attacks on the other two gates are. So it's all for Steelbow Ranger to do. But he has all the tools on hand that he needs, really, to hold on to this position. I would say, however, based on the room that he's given Mordor, he does need to think about when he should be pulling back. Because, of course, when he pulls back, his allies are also going to need to pull back. I'm not sure what's going on here. That is a plume of green smoke, which would suggest witches have been deployed. And there they are. There's only 6 of them, so they must have been damaged by something. Not quite sure what. Mordor don't have many ranged tools, but such is the way of things. Unless they got a little bit too close to a melee engagement, I'm not sure. Still, they need to be very careful here at using the witches, to be fair. The Temple Executioners are an awfully tempting target, but you could very easily end up grilling hundreds of your own Guardians of Kharn. That is the danger of such a powerful unit. Meanwhile over here, still the Olag High doing their thing, and to be fair, the Olag High will be making a bit of an impact on the Witcher-armed pikemen. Pikes are not really the best tool to use against trolls either, somewhat counterintuitively, because you'd imagine that they probably would be, but that is not the case, because trolls can infiltrate their spear wall formation much more easily than most units with their massive mass. And of course, if you take away that formation from pikes, generally speaking, outside of a very few exceptions, their stats are nothing really to write home about. There are some Witcher-armed Blackguard as well. Still, the Angmar Marauders up on the walls remain untested after the initial waves of units. They're much more intent on going through the gate. I would say, you don't need much to bring down these Angmar Marauders. It's too juicy a target to ignore. So I'm a little bit surprised that Mordor have not elected to try and test this. Temple Guard, a testing volley. These Scourge Raiders are still waiting patiently for a chance to use their throwing axes. Orc Maulers are coming forward now as well to support the Moran on halberds. There's still enough pikes on the front line, however, to really bog this Mordor assault down. Some Orc Javelins coming in, tagging some Barrow Wights, but many of them will get back up. Barrow Wights, it's the long game you have to play with them. There are so few units that can kill them instantaneously. There is a pile of corpses there, which I would imagine came about as a result of the Witchers, but again, a bit of room. More throwing axes being used, and those Blackguard of Barad-dûr are so healthy but already wavering. Fear causing from the Barrow Wights taking its impact. You need to be very careful here, Mordor. Like, this is the thing. They really need to go all in or really trickle their units in to just keep Medexa's attention. If they go all in, they may very well start to have an impact, but if they do what they're doing at the moment, again, these Scourge Raiders are really doing the business against a lot of these rank and file Moranon units, and if you don't have really elite units backing them up, their morale will start to collapse. Orcs, of course, not the most disciplined, and the Guardians of Kharn over on this wall having the desired effect. Temple Executioner's victory seems certain for them. It will be a long road, but they will ultimately beat these Guardians of Kharn. But I can't help but feel as though the battle will be decided in other places first, which will really impact what goes on there. Again, more Melkor's Chosen coming forward, but more Scourge Raiders. The Scourge Raiders have really been an important unit for Angmar's defence so far, as you would expect, given the fact that there is less emphasis on long-range projectiles in this particular battle. So the throwing axes really going about their business, but this is a worry for Angmar at this point. This front line was made up so heavily of Barrow Wights that the Melkor's Chosen pushed through it so easily, and now they're going to be able to charge in. They don't lurch forward, so they don't get a full charge there on the Witcher-armed Scourge Raiders, but they're going to be able to swing those mighty maces and do a bit of damage, potentially, to the Scourge Raiders. If they can back up, I mean, they need to be really careful, because if they get into sustained melee with the trolls, that's not really where any cavalry wants to be. It's a different story if you get a charge off with those Caragor riders, but not sustained melee. That's where trolls have got the better of that engagement. Hammerguard are going to crush Morannon units as well, so far they haven't really made the best use of having cavalry in behind enemy lines. Bloodbath McGrath needs to get his ducks in a row with that cavalry more quickly than he's currently doing. Scourge Raiders charging outside the walls, backing up some units that were already out here and going on the offensive here, Angmar. Maybe a bit of a rush of blood to the head. I mean, they're going to win the initial engagements, but I'm not sure whether Angmar are going to have the longevity to be able to get away with this sort of thing for too long. Yeah, those Melkor's Chosen are being pushed back into a corner. And the Melkor, yeah, like, I mean, at the very least it's keeping the trolls off the front line, I suppose, but you would have hoped for far more getting these Melkor's Chosen in behind enemy lines in the way that he did. He did the hard bit, and then he wandered his way into anti-cavalry options and lost micro on them. Can't afford to be faffing around with your infantry when you've got the ability to deal potentially so much damage. And Steelbow Ranger, I think he fancies his chances at this point of holding on to this position indefinitely if he's sending down more reinforcements, including the Scourge Raiders. Let's see here. There are the Olag High. Defeat seems certain for the Gundabad Guard. Those Mordor trolls will start to have an impact. Those Temple Executions, meanwhile, taking very little losses and carving their way through the first unit of Guardians of Khand Dûm before they will then make their way over to the second. But at this point, Falcon's centre army is weak enough that Medexa can start to siphon off units for support elsewhere. Blackguard of Barad-dûr routing, Orc Maulers routing. It's really not going that well over here, you would have to say, for Mordor. Angmar holding on really rather comfortably. And at this point, they've elected to not defend the walls because Mordor, despite setting up these siege towers, and this is the thing, even if siege towers are not the best way of getting onto the walls, like they're dangerous, you still need to pressure as many points as possible when you're the attackers, because if you narrow the engagements, this is where Angmar are going to be much, much more comfortable. They've got fairly elite armies, they've got really useful tools for holding on to narrow positions like this, the Witcher-on Pikemen being just one of those, the Barrow-wights being another. It's going to be really difficult for you as Mordor if you narrow your options like this, especially when you're 5v3. You just need to spread your armies out a little bit more, and the siege towers were one possible way of doing that. Unfortunately for them, however, over on this side, they haven't really taken full advantage of that, and MSQ has held on very resolutely to these front lines. Scourge Raiders there as well, axe and falchion in hand. Gundabad Guard are also there. Now with a bit of support from Medexa, of course, it's like a second wave of defenders. Angmar could hold on to this position indefinitely. Now Ardenai and Shadowbows are a bit of a different kettle of fish. Ripping shots into some densely packed formations back here could have the desired effect. But it's over here where I think Mordor could, emphasis on could, salvage the situation. You can see Angmar Halberds starting to rout. They've got much more room to operate in over here, Mordor. But Steelbow Ranger is also being quite aggressive at getting into the enemy's faces. Scourge Raiders, of course, are decent in melee now that they've used up their throwing axes. So they're getting in amongst things. Minas Morgul Chosen, this kind of unit honestly is probably what Mordor have been missing over on the other side. If they were going to be that aggressive, they needed a solid core to that army. And the Minas Morgul Chosen would have provided that. They wouldn't have done much more damage than they've already done, but they would have at least have fallen away quite as quickly as the largely Morannon and troll-based attack that MP Beckamy and Big Les have decided to try and engage in. Orc Maulers coming forward, backing up some of these Morannon Guard. Some Nazgûl are in here as well, 7 of them, so a couple of them have died. But that's the thing, Nazgûl, the invisible killer in many ways. Oh, and that's a nice rear charge there. Enough to tip Steelbow Ranger into being half gone. Mordor do need this, however, because their allies are struggling on the other fronts. So they need to get in here somewhere, because as soon as they get through one gate, of course, they will need to start retreating. Morannon infantry are here, backing up the Temple Executioners. Slowly but surely, having the impact on Medexa's lines that they want. Orc Javelins are leaving once more, having gone up the siege tower, but this is a very dense collection of Angmar polearms. What is going on over here, I wonder? Forward come the Barrow-wights, Gundabad Guard, getting up close and personal, and now, perhaps, seeing that they are weak enough, a good moment perhaps for MSQ2 to utilise his cavalry contingent. Warg skirmishers, I don't know whether they've already utilised their javelins. They may very well have done when we weren't over here, because they had an opportunity to use their skirmishers like that. One of the trolls comes in here. He's taking point blank fire from the armour-piercing archers, so that ended about as you would have expected. A lot of this cavalry is going to get hung up on all of these units as well. These armour-piercing arrows, ripping shots. Nazgul from MP Beckamy killing off one of the Barrow-wights, showing who is top of the undead food chain. And there are the Warg skirms, trotting their way forwards quite happily. Maybe not so happily when they get entangled with Temple Guard. Of course, even in melee though, the Temple Guard, especially against the Wargs, are going to do a lot of damage really rather quickly. This is the unit they want to shut down though. If you can kill off these shadow bows, it's such a potent tool, as we've seen so many times, Rangers, and of course it's a tool Angmar don't have. The Witchers really are their showstopper ranged unit. Mordor, of course, with the shadow bows. Armour-piercing archers are a little bit different. Not so much of a showstopper. Can do a lot of damage to one unit, and then they can help do the business in melee as well with those Numenorian longswords. Meanwhile, where are they going? Morannon infantry are routing? That's surprising. That's a very disappointing performance from those Morannon units, as Angmar put more pressure on. Of course, the Temple Execution is made of much sterner stuff. What's going on over there? Farkin is abandoning this gate completely at this point, which again I think is a bit of a mistake. When you see this, you're electing not to pressure more lines. You're narrowing the engagement, and that's always a bit of a bad sign. Meanwhile, Blackguard of Barad-dûr pushing back against the Angmar defenders. I have to say, Medex are getting onto this position now as well, offering a bit of support, Angmar Hellbirds, which is good. Now Medex, I think, needs to get more units over here to help Steelbow Ranger out, because he is the one who has been placed under the most pressure in this battle so far, or at least the most effective pressure among the ranks of Mordor. These Witch-Round pikemen are starting to struggle as more Olag High, bloodied though they may be, continue to put pressure on, and the pikes doing that thing that they do in Medieval 2 where they back up into the enemy before turning around and getting their pikes down, but it's not going to matter too much as those Olag High continue to crush them underfoot. Forward come Mordor now, Bloodbath McGrath with those steel bows, not steel bows, shadow bows. Steel bows, of course, is something that the Temple Guard use, getting into position to fire their missiles as well. What will Steelbow Ranger do now? Is he going to elect to retreat, I wonder? Things are getting a little bit out of control, and there are more units that can be pushed forward. Farkin is over here now. I mean, you'd hope that Mordor could push their way through here now, with Farkin's army also over here. Will they pull back to the second layer? Or will they counter-attack from the side? Large part of that will be how much MSQ can spare, really, as he's clearly had the better of this melee engagement. Indeed, looking like this Mordor assault is really on its last legs at this point. The cavalry sally out, really the final nail in the Mordor coffin over here. They're still going to fight to the bitter end, of course. Temple Guard will not go down without a fight, but go down they will at this point in time. Further back, Angmar Marauders. Yeah, I think MSQ, he absolutely at this point has got strength to spare. This Blackguard and Hammerguard, not even in melee. So he's managed to preserve his bodyguard units almost completely unharmed. And I think at this point they maybe are thinking about retreating to the second layer. Indeed they are, so I would assume that MSQ is also going to do that. But he needs to finish off those armies over there, so he's going to need to get a shift on in killing that Temple Guard contingent. Blackguard of Barad-dûr push in the end having the desired effect for Mordor. Will they be able to make up for the fact that the attack on the other side ended in failure? We shall have to wait and see. The Barrow-wights, of course, they can't really be retreated because of how slow they are, but they can act as really the most effective rear guard you could want because of how long they last in melee. Back over there, Morannon infantry as well, Temple Guard moving forward. So Grizzly Fox. Actually, there is still a unit over here from Big Les as well, Sauron's Will. So Mordor really have been sort of jumping on this Gates bandwagon. Lots of the armies have sent over a couple of units, and 2 units of Sauron's Will preserved from Big Les, which may be why MSQ2 able to win the fight on the other side. It'd be really interesting to see if MP Beckamy has also got units over here, because Big Les clearly has pulled off a lot of his units from that particular front line. I don't think so. I mean, Witch Realm Inquisitors, this is the problem though, they're now in the back lines going after the Orc Fodder. Orc Fodder can be used as a rear guard in this situation, they are spears, but cycle charging into them will still result in them ultimately being defeated. So now the mobility certainly in favour of Angmar, they do need to be a little careful. But I do think MP Beckamy was the fall guy in this battle. Big Les and Farkin able to send over some units over here, and they will now be able to flood into the settlement, into Karndu. The Troll Drummers doing their thing as well, that unit of Barrow-wights now being dealt with. Maulers moving forwards. Angmar Halberd, some Hammer Guard from MSQ2. Perhaps seeing an opportunity to finish off this unit of Temple Executioners from Farkin, but they need to be very careful because there are Nazgul in here now as well, and they may not be able to retreat as a result of this. And Farkin actually did have a single unit left over here, probably a unit that returned from routing, to be honest with you, of Morannon infantry, but here they are nonetheless, joining in the assault now. As long as they perform when it matters, I suppose, who cares when they rout and when they don't. The Orc motto. And there are some Orc Javelins trying to offer a bit of support, again doing a bit of damage. MSQ2, probably the first misstep he's made in this battle so far. He is getting his Hammer Guard out now, so he doesn't leave them there to die, which is good. These Barrow-wights continue to slowly move back, and it does look as though they're going all the way back to the final stand, electing not to defend the second layer. But this is on the attackers now. The attackers, if they want to take advantage of the large amount of space they have to operate in within the first and second layer, then what they need to do, when they do score a hit there on the Barrow-wights, then what they need to do is be swift. If they dawdle here, then they will allow the defenders to go back to the final layer, which of course is going to be far more difficult for Mordor to take given the losses that they have already sustained. But whatever way this battle goes, it's going to end fairly quickly. We are approaching the final phases of this battle after all. And I'm not sure, I mean, Angmar, they've done really well in sort of the brute force engagements that there have been so far, but 5v3s like this, if you engage in that kind of melee fight for attrition, against Mordor as well with all their numbers, I'd be quite surprised if even Angmar could pull that off. I don't know what sort of support they've still got. Maybe they've got a unit of witches back here. I mean, they've definitely got some elite units. I'm not sure though. It has been an interesting one though. A siege battle that has been less decided by ranged units on the defence. Having a very limited selection of archers when you're defending a settlement like this is really where Angmar can come a bit unstuck, I suppose, given the fact that they really only have access to goblin trackers as an archer that's worth anything at all. And even then, that's maybe being a bit generous to the goblin trackers, to be honest with you. But Mordor moving forward, they still have this troll catapult, which could be so effective at this late stage of the battle. Don't know how much ammunition the Rangers still have, but of course backing yourself into a corner does open you up for attack by body-piercing projectiles. These Barrow-wights, victory seems certain for them, not for too much longer, as Mordor continue to march forward. Plenty of trolls, troll drummers and Olag High, and of course they can chuck out damage at a rate that will impact the Barrow-wights, and when they're being backed up by all of this infantry as well, that will make a big difference. Interesting fight this though. I like the theme. It's very rare that you see orcs on the defence and on the attack sort of almost exclusively. And it can result in these very violent engagements as we've seen so far. There are some Blackguard of Barad-dûr. What will they do, I wonder? Ooh, those... There we can see the gates opening as MSQ2 looks to come outside, and Angmar are going to actually empty themselves. I think perhaps they see that if they back themselves into a corner, stuff like the Troll Catapult could prove to be a bit of an insurmountable foe. They should have ammunition of their own still from Steelbow Rangers Catapult. This is a very interesting ploy, this from MSQ2. I mean, it'll be interesting to see if this works out for the better. Blackguard of Barad-dûr being engaged as Angmar sally forwards. Guardians of Karndoom getting into melee. Witch Realm Scourge Raiders will attack from the side as well. A bit depleted at this point, but they will still be very useful. Of course, this is really what sets the Scourge Raiders apart. They can do damage at range, but also they're not half bad in melee. Very multifaceted unit, which is really countered by archers most effectively, and of course that has been something which hasn't really been a factor in this battle. There are the Sauron's Will. They will clamp the jaws down on those Scourge Raiders, and it could be that this decision to attack forwards and abandon their defensive position could be a little bit too foolhardy. There are the Witch Realm Hammer Guard who will, I mean, they'll dominate against Morannon infantry, but I get the feeling with stuff like Temple Guard. Yeah, I think perhaps what they were looking at here is if we back ourselves into a corner, it's a good defensive position, but the catapult, the rangers, like, we don't have the ranged advantage by any means anymore. We're just going to get shot. So we may as well sally forwards and try and at least take the fight to Mordor and see if they have what it takes left to defeat us in melee. Which, it's debatable if they do, to be honest with you. Angmar are definitely down to their last legs, but we'll see. Gundabad Guard over here from Medaxa, Scourge Raiders. Mordor have definitely got some impressive units themselves. They've still got some Temple Executioners, still some Trolls. The Ardenheim Shadowbows having a bit of an issue in terms of getting their ammunition down. Nazgul over here in a web of pole arms, but if any unit can fight their way out of a situation like that, it would be them. Everything needs to be committed to melee at this point. Indeed, the catapult also needs to get into position. A few good hits from the Angmar catapult could send a lot of the rank and file Mordor units routing, and that would be a disaster for them. This is the problem now for Angmar. Farkin able to get his unit of rangers into position. A little bit surprised he's not shooting point blank with those Hammer Guard, to be honest with you. Shooting over there means he's more likely to hit his own men. He does now retarget to the Hammer Guard. Sauron's Will butchering their way through the Guardians of Carn-dûm there, and now they have a way into the town centre. And the Blackguard of Barad-dûr do take the TC. They will be bumping a lot of these units back into the fight, but that's not really too much of an issue because most of them are so depleted anyway, but still. I like the fact that Angmar weren't just willing to sit there and accept their fate, because I do think if they'd just sat in the town centre, so many Temple Guards, so much Ranger ammunition, a Troll catapult, it wouldn't have gone very well for them. And even though it is looking like this assault isn't going to be the saviour for them, there goes an Angmar general after all. That is a nice hit though, right through those Temple Guard. They were at least willing to try and make something happen, but it is looking like the Witch King's rebellion is going to be brought to heel. Then we'll have the Witch Realm Blackguard. Javelins being utilised as well, albeit they're probably more likely to get friendly fire in this situation at this point. And those Witch Realm Hammer Guard took an awful lot of punishment very, very quickly, bloodied up. Now the Minas Morgul chosen. Still healthy Uruk captains. Yeah, it's Mordor's at this point. It's going to be all over, unfortunately, for Angmar. So in the end, they do get what they want. And I think a lot of that does actually have to do with lots of these catapults at this point being destroyed. I think a lot of that actually has to do with just the fact that it turned into just a pure fight of martial strength in melee. And when it's a 5v3, it's always going to be fairly tricky to win that kind of engagement. It's not impossible, there are factions you can do it with, but Angmar and Mordor have got strengths that are so similar in many ways that you'd always have to back Mordor in this fight. Because I think Angmar did a lot of things well. Mordor as well got away with a couple of things. The fact that they weren't really pressurising all choke points all at once. They made it work for them, but they only made it work for them, to be fair, because of the good initial work that Bloodbath and Grizzly Fox did, I think. If that fight wasn't going too well for them either, then it could well have gone all a bit pear-shaped for Mordor. Still units that have perpetually routing in the town centre. It's a very interesting bug, that. Panicked orcs. Worrying themselves silly. I do wonder as well, is there still mounted units? There is. This unit of Blackguard of Barad-dûr acting as a defensive buffer against these Witch Realm Inquisitors. And I have to say, this cavalry, while it was useful for running through what remained of MP Beckhamy's army, and it has been a bit of an annoyance, I would say that given the amount he spent on it, it probably wasn't worth bringing for MSQ2. Angmar's cavalry force, I would bring some Warg skirmishers potentially for the javelins, and then potential use for their mounted options later, but the Inquisitors I think are just too expensive for this sort of situation, and you could have spent that money on something else. I think also the Witches were maybe used in too gung-ho a fashion. We only really saw one really telling hit, and that was on low tier units. So you'd have to say the Witches weren't used all that well in this fight, and Angmar were always going to live and die by that sort of thing, given the lack of other ranged options they had other than the Scourge Raiders, which to be fair, the Scourge Raiders were used quite well. Definitely the best part, I think, of Angmar's fight. A Guardian of Khan Doom fighting off against the Temple Guardsman. Temple Guardsman actually is bloodied, but in this particular fight you would definitely back the Black Numenorian over the Foul Orc. Doesn't really matter though, because he was chopped down in the back by the cleaver of that Blackguard. And now, well and truly, we're going to see the end of all Angmar resistance back here as all of these little individual units are hunted down. And it is just going to be a case of trying to hunt down the ranged units, I suppose, at this point. What is going on over here? There is allegedly a fight going on between something. It's one Barrowite, that's what it was. And MP Beckamy is still here. That's the amusing thing. Like, MSQ ran through with all of that cavalry, but the Nazgul survived, and MP Beckamy stands among the conquered dead. Most of them being his army, of course. But sometimes you just got to have that role. And sometimes it's just going to be that way. This Blackguard, meanwhile, is being hounded by the Witch Realm Inquisitors, who are going to fill their boots in terms of kills here. That doesn't necessarily mean that I think they were worthwhile, though. Troll drummers, I mean, they're not as good as other trolls, but they can still do the business, potentially, here against these Inquisitors. Javelins are up here as well. I mean, it's been, in the end, it turned into a fairly convincing victory from Mordor, but it was a very violent fight, to be fair, and it's only really gotten away from Angmar in a significant manner towards the end here. Other than that, it's always going to be quite difficult to see who's going to win when it comes down to a match of pure strength like this. Yeah, I'd say the best Angmar unit overall was probably the Scourge Raiders on this occasion. The best Mordor unit, not entirely sure. A lot of them did quite well. I think the Blackguard were used reasonably. I think the Minas Morgul chosen were very helpful over on this side. Maybe not this one, because I don't think this one was really committed all that much, if at all. Weapons unbloodied. Sauron's Will also very useful. Anything armour piercing is going to be useful against Angmar, because that's of course where they get a lot of their strength. More javelins being thrown downhill. Nazgul are here from Farkin. And you can see a lot of the high tier units from Mordor still coming out of the woodwork. They've got a lot more variety at their high tier than Angmar have. Angmar may have the more solid mid tier, but in terms of high tier units, I would prefer to have Mordor's selection, even though the Blackguard are the better line infantry bodyguard and the Hammer Guard are something Mordor don't have in an AP bodyguard in melee. Mordor got so many options. And their ranged force is of course better. Which did prove to be a factor actually in this fight. The Rangers and the armour-piercing archers that were utilised very well, and that is going to be that. So there you can see Menex are not really pulling their weight in terms of kills. I would say that's because in the end Mordor not pressurising the central gate as much turned out to be a bit of a positive for them, to be honest with you, because Medexa did send reinforcements, but in the end you could say that they needed to send reinforcements over to Steelbow Ranger a little bit sooner, because that was clearly where the danger lay. MSQ2 had things under control really over there, and Medexa didn't really need to send more to help finish off MP Beckamy's army, and Steelbow Ranger did need more assistance. In the end, Mordor, once Bloodbath and Grizzly really set the scene over on that gate, and they got some reinforcements from Farkin and from Big Les. Yeah, in the end, that ended up being the decisive factor, and once that happened, Mordor carried that momentum all the way to the finish line, so fair play to them, I say. Let's see what did the damage for the Angmarim armies, however. Pretty good spread of kills there from MSQ2. His elite units as well only really came into action later on, so it goes to show they can rack up a kill count pretty quickly. The trolls were deployed early and to pretty good effect. The Warg skirmishers maybe you'd hope for a couple more kills on them. The Witch Realm Inquisitors, like I said, a lot of those kills were padded in the late game, and also a few of them would have been on Orc fodder. I still maintain that they probably weren't a worthwhile inclusion. You could have spent it on something else that was more effective. The Witch has got 329 kills, but again, most of that would have been on fodder and Moran on guard. The Witches in general could have been used more effectively across this battle, I think, and that was one of the main ways in which Angmar could have turned this around. Scourge Raiders, on the other hand, I think they were used reasonably effectively throughout by all of the Angmar players. Guardians of Khan Doom used well. The Pikemen and Marauders, well, not less so the Marauders, but the Pikemen obviously the anchor to most Angmar lines in this situation. Steelbow Ranger, the player who we were seeing the battle from the perspective of, Gundabad Guard with 403 kills. That is an incredible amount for a unit of good, but still mid to upper tier spears. They must have been fighting off against Mordor's rank and file for a long time, surely, because that is an incredible amount of kills for a unit of Gundabad Guard. I don't think I've ever seen them get that many kills. His bodyguard units, less impressive perhaps, but then they were also committed later on, especially the Blackguard were. The Hammer Guard were involved a little bit earlier, and that's why their kill count is more impressive. Guardians of Khan Doom doing the business, the Trolls doing okay, but burnt down relatively quickly. Angmar Halberds with 301 as well, so it's actually some of the more basic units for him that ended up doing quite well. Scourge Raiders, all performing decently. Medexa, his Guardians of Khan Doom, doing nicely. Angmar Halberds, but again, not enough kills for some of these units because they were just sort of sat in the middle. And yeah, I mean, Farkin, I suppose, under most circumstances I would urge caution against that kind of thing, but I suppose on this occasion hanging back on certain choke points did work out. It all depends on how well you do on the other choke points, I suppose, but everything did fall into place for Mordor from that perspective, and in the end, based on that, you'd have to say Mordor are worthy winners, and the Witch King's rebellion, such as it was, has been ended. I'm sure punishment will be meted out. And interestingly, the Witch King and the Witch Realm Inquisitor unit would have been one of the last people to fall as well, and he would have had to watch from outside Khan Doom as his citadel fell under the true Dark Lord, under his banner anyway. But yeah, big thank you to Steelbow Ranger for sending this one to me, and a big thank you to all of the players for being a part of this battle replay. As I said, it's probably pretty likely at this point that a channel update would have already occurred, I believe. One way or the other, I will know what I'm going to be doing in the long run with my channel, and also how quickly the changes will have to be brought into effect. Regardless, I am recording ahead of time quite a lot at this point, just so that whatever happens, I've got a bit of a buffer, so that hopefully the content, regardless of sort of the amount of content, can keep flowing at a regular rate. But regardless of that, that's the sort of thing that I would have hopefully already spoken about in a channel update video, and things will have become much clearer. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.